Alright everybody, it appears that we are in the middle of one of the best flashbacks in One Piece history. So this flashback right off the bat is beginning to remind me a lot of the Oden flashback, wherein the flashback was about Oden, but it also encompassed a lot of other aspects of the One Piece lore, and wasn't just about his character. So I imagine most of us view this as the Loki flashback, but so far it's told us a lot about Harold as a character as well. It feels like an origin story for him as well, and really an origin story for the nation of Elbaf as we know it today. As in, like, how did Elbaf become the modern day version of Elbaf? But then at the same time, it seems like this flashback is set to give us context on a lot of the missing lore that basically took place before Roger's era in the One Piece world. Particularly, of course, with the biggest name before Roger, which was Rox. And how did the Rox era really take shape? Who was Rox? And what implications does his story have for the modern day of One Piece? So the same way that the Oden flashback, it started off with Oden, but also gave us a lot of context on Wano in general, and the stories of the Scabbards, and then progressed to give us context on the stories of Whitebeard and Roger's final voyage to Laugh Tale. Before circling back to conclude Oden's story, I'm really curious how much this flashback is set to give us a huge amount of context for Rox's story in general. Because during Oden's flashback, I don't imagine that people assume that we'd be seeing everything regarding Roger down to him reaching Laugh Tale, like his most legendary journey. So I'm really curious how much we're going to get to see of Rox's story here. Is it just going to be his visit to Elbaf, or are we going to get to see some major events in Rox's life? I'm going to go ahead and assume that we are not going to see God Valley. I think that that is something that is going to be saved for later. I think Oda might still want to hold his cards close to his chest when it comes to that big dramatic reveal. But the lead up to it, especially from the Rox Pirates end, I imagine that we could be getting that now. But I want to piece this chapter out, so let's talk about Loki first, and then I'm going to talk about Rox at the end, and then one of my viewers from the Voice of the People actually has an amazing theory regarding what actually happened with Rox at Reverie, so we're going to stay tuned for that at the end, because it's something that I think could actually connect a lot of the scattered dots that we have here. But first, this month we just dropped our newly inspired versions of the best-selling One Piece Island posters for your walls. Water 7 at Night, the Straw Hats Stand at Enies Lobby, Luffy's Loss at Alabasta, the Destruction of Skypiea, and more. All of these islands have been vividly reimagined, so make sure to check them out. You can get any 2 posters you like from the entire collection and get another 2 free. You can also get a bundle of 15 for a major discount, or even the entire collection bundle for a major discount. And if you complete your collection and you have 1 poster of every island, then we will send you the final exclusive unlockable poster for free, the Moon. So get your posters by hitting the link in the description below. So starting with Loki, this flashback is doing wonders for Loki. He is becoming a very sympathetic character. Obviously his mistreatment as a baby right off the back in the previous chapter set him up to have a very tragic backstory, and this one picks up right where it left off. We're getting very much the picture of basically a boy who grew up without any sort of love, and that's why his heart turned out to be the way that it is. Now we can somewhat empathize with why he wants the destruction of the world, because the world has been nothing but unkind to him, so why would he want to preserve a world that is as terrible as what he perceives it to be? For Loki, I imagine that these stories about Nika, this liberating god who would come and basically bring an end to the world and bring the dawn of a new, better world, that must have sounded very appealing to him. So seeing Loki's mistreatment as a child, as a baby, and then seeing how it led to him acting out, it's a very realistic depiction of how children react to that sort of trauma in the real world. When a child is deprived of any form of love and is instead met with only hate, it can lead them to lash out, to want to pour that negative energy back out into the world, and so that leads to acting out, to violence. But underneath all of that is a very broken soul that is suffering deeply. The fact that Loki as a child was literally suicidal underneath all of the chaos that he was causing adds such an important layer to the character. And again, I think Loki is on his way to, I've said this before, becoming maybe my favorite side character in One Piece, at least my favorite island side character. So he's fast on the way to passing up Viper for me. I just want to see where the rest of his story goes. But Loki was a phenomenal decision character writing wise by Oda. And what I also really like is the contrast between Loki and Hutch Rudin. So here I want to congratulate the winner of last week's chapter predictions, in that Francisco Mas correctly predicted that Loki would be jealous of Hutch Rudin's love from his mother and from the Giants of Elbaf. Make sure to tune into Monday streams to get in on the chapter predictions competitions. So generally speaking, yes, Hutch Rudin and Loki, they both came to hate each other because they both had what the other brother lacked. Loki has the strength. He is the mightiest warrior of Elbaf right from birth. And he has the bloodline that makes him the next king of the pirates, whereas Hadrudin is just a bastard. But what Hadrudin does have is people that do love him and care for him. And that's the one thing that Loki craves above all else. Because we see Hadrudin as an adult, and he struggles. He's not that strong. He's going extreme diff with like the 8th strongest member of the Doflamingo pirates. But he dreams of becoming strong enough to be this mighty leader of the giants, this powerful warrior king of Elbaf. He's not that. Loki is the one who's cut out to be that. But Loki growing up, he dreamed of having friends. He wanted people that would love him, embrace him, and so on. And Hadrudin certainly has that right now. So I love this sort of dichotomy in that sometimes when Oda writes brother duos or sibling duos, it's kind of like, well, one brother's just clearly superior in every way to the other brother. But I like that that's not the case with Loki and Hadrudin. And it's also not like one of them's evil whereas one of them's good, which is also another common trope that Oda employs with brothers in One Piece. They're both ultimately good characters that were just not the best towards each other growing up or even as adults, simply because they were both hurt by what the other person had that they lacked. So I do think the Loki and Hadrudin story is going to connect and come to a good resolution, with both of them learning to love and care for each other at the end of the current modern day storyline. And who knows, I might even come to like Hadrudin as a character. But Loki definitely shaping up to be one of the best One Piece characters of all time. But with that, let's get into Rocks. A lot of things came together about Rocks with this chapter, as well as what its true purpose in the story is meant to be. I'm saving most of that for this next Tuesday's video, but I'm going to talk about a few things right here. The biggest thing is probably that Rocks was confirmed to be Blackbeard's father. Now, a lot of people speculated on who Rocks might be the father of, because we all assumed that Rocks probably had somebody in the newer generation who he's the parent of. Blackbeard was always kind of the most boring option, to the point that it was just like, I think it wasn't even commonly talked about that much that Rocks would be Blackbeard's father, because it was kind of just the obvious option, right? It's just like, well, the ages line up, and Rocks D. Zebek, Blackbeard's clearly following in his footsteps. He has a ship named the Saber of Zebek. He seems to be the equivalent, like the Rocks to Luffy's Roger. Everything just lined up so neatly that it almost just felt like not interesting to even talk about Rocks being Blackbeard's father. That's why you saw a lot more theories. Like earlier, I remember a common theory was, what if Shanks is Rocks' son? And then later on I saw that Buggy might be Rocks' son, which by the way is a theory that is still alive, and some people have pointed out some design similarities there as well. But at the end of the day, Blackbeard being Rocks' son was just the most straightforward option, to the point that it was so simple and straightforward that most people didn't even really discuss it. But with the reveal that Rocks is Blackbeard's father, sometimes it's just like, well, the most simple and straightforward story route is also what does the most for the story. Because with this confirmed, it does actually add a lot of weight to what Blackbeard's story means today. Again, most of that I'm going to talk about in next Tuesday's video, but one small thing I'll say here is that it really recontextualizes the Crossroads of Fate, the grand battle between Blackbeard and Ace, which turned out to be, in retrospect, the sort of generational rematch between Roger's son and Rocks' son. And this time, it was Rocks' legacy that came out on top. So I have a lot more to say about Rocks and Blackbeard that I'm saving for next week's video, so watch out for that. But just talking about the other things that we learned about Rocks here, I love that it's established that off-screen, as his first feat as a pirate, he just took out a Marine Admiral. And I know that there's some super diehard Admiral fans that want to argue that like no character ever in One Piece could ever possibly defeat an Admiral in just straight up combat. And they're going to argue that, well, it was at the Reverie, and Admirals aren't allowed to go all out at the Reverie. And that's true, but now we've learned that it was a battle to the death. Like, Rocks literally killed this Admiral. So at a certain point, an Admiral is going to stop holding back when it's like, all right, I'm literally gonna die if I don't stop holding back. I don't think there's any Admiral in the story that's so brainwashed that they're like, you know what? I would literally rather die than allow a single Celestial Dragon to experience any sort of residual damage from my full power. Once it's life or death, you're gonna stop holding back and just deal with the consequences of having disobeyed orders later.
You'll be shot for this?
Nah, I don't think so. More like chewed out. I've been chewed out before.
So, Rocks took out an Admiral as a rookie pirate. First feat ever. Look, that's good. We should embrace that. I don't see why people want to poke holes at this feat. This is the character that is meant to be being hyped up in the story right now, right? This is the top 3 greatest pirates ever, maybe top 3 strongest pirates ever, alongside Roger and Whitebeard, the predecessor to the most important villain in One Piece, Blackbeard. We are supposed to feel hyped for this character right now. So Oda established very clearly that Rocks just up and took out an Admiral right off the bat. On top of this, I love Rocks' attitude coming into Elbaf, saying I have 2 questions and the answer is going to be yes to both of them. That established his personality very nicely and succinctly. This is a man who seems like he probably has the disposition of a king, because that is essentially how those with Conqueror's Haki would act. And at the same time, I like his design quite a bit. It's not as sinister and traditionally badass as the silhouette that we got in chapter 957, but at the same time, it does seem really cool and its own sort of vibe, a twist on Blackbeard's design, kind of like a wild version of Blackbeard. So I really like the route that Oda went with this. And finally, we have an insane theory from the Voice of the People, my top tier of patrons. So Sunnyclip pointed out, if Rox was a king at Reverie, then maybe this was the king that Brook served under. His position would have had him follow the royal party to Marijua and learn about the Holy Knights. Rox losing his status led to Brook being a pirate. Maybe the incident where Rox killed an admiral was also the inciting incident for Gunko as we know her now. I love this concept because it connects so many different dots. If Rox was initially invited to the Reverie and he only became a pirate afterwards, that means that Rox really was a king at some point, and there was something that caused Brook to stop being a member of a royal guard and then instead become a pirate. And the little bit of flashback that we saw seemed to imply that something happened to the king, Gunko's father, that Brook was serving. So all of that could come together right here. If Oda has been planning this for Brook for this long, that would just be insanely masterful planning, and I think timeline-wise it all lines up as well, because Brook became a pirate sometime a little bit before 50 years ago, and the Rox incident happened 56 years ago. So I think everything kind of lines up. We're getting the Rox information right now. We're getting Brook's full story here right now. I would not be surprised if these things are meant to click together. So that would just be insane, amazing storytelling by Oda if he had all of this thought out from the beginning, but I certainly would not put that past him. So great point, Sunnyclip. Very possible. Amazing theory if it turns out to be true. So with that, I'll talk to you all next Tuesday with an elaborate breakdown of Rox, and I'm looking forward very much to next chapter next Friday. So with that, I'll talk to you all later.